Speed isn't always about who draws first. Sometimes it's about who everyone underestimates. In the stories of the Old West, we've heard tales of legendary gunslingers who made their names in dramatic shootouts on dusty streets. But perhaps none is more intriguing than the story of Michael "Lightning" Cooper, a man who spent more time polishing glasses than pistols, yet whose speed with a gun would become whispered about in saloons from Texas to the Dakota Territory. They say the quietest thunder strikes the hardest, and in the case of the Silver Dollar Saloon's owner, that saying couldn't have been more true. Join me today as we delve into the story of how a simple saloonkeeper became one of the most feared men in the Arizona Territory, not because he went looking for trouble, but because trouble made the mistake of finding him. Before we dive deeper into this tale, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story about the Cherokee scout who outsmarted an entire cavalry regiment is one you won't want to miss. Tucson, Arizona Territory, 1876. The summer heat lay thick as a wool blanket over the town, making even the lizards seek shade beneath the weathered boardwalks. The Silver Dollar Saloon stood on the corner of Main and Allen Streets, its freshly painted exterior and clean windows setting it apart from the dustier establishments that lined the thoroughfare. Inside, Michael Cooper went about his daily routine, meticulously cleaning glasses with the same careful precision he applied to everything in his life. At 45 years old, Cooper cut an unremarkable figure, medium height, graying at the temples, with hands that looked more suited to handling delicate glassware than gun grips. His most distinctive feature was his eyes, pale blue and alert, though few people ever noticed them behind the wire-rimmed spectacles he wore. Those who frequented his establishment knew him as a fair businessman, quick with a friendly word, but never one to engage in idle gossip. What they didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that those steady hands had once belonged to the fastest gun in the Kansas Territory. 15 years earlier, before he'd traded his holster for an apron, Cooper had been known by a different name, one that still caused old-timers to lower their voices when speaking of him. But that was a past he'd carefully buried, along with the custom Colt he kept hidden beneath the bar, its pearl grip worn smooth from years of use. Sheriff Thomas Wade was one of the few who knew Cooper's true identity. He'd recognized him the day the saloonkeeper had first arrived in Tucson, but something in those pale blue eyes had convinced him to keep that knowledge to himself. Some men deserve a fresh start, he'd later write in his journal, and some secrets are best left buried in the Kansas dust. The trouble began on a Wednesday, though later folks would argue about whether it was the second or third week of July. The McKinnon gang had blown through 3 banks in as many weeks, leaving a trail of empty vaults and grieving widows across the territory. Led by the infamous James McKinnon and his younger brother Robert, they'd earned a reputation for casual cruelty that set them apart from common bandits. That afternoon, as Cooper was restocking his whiskey supplies, a stranger darkened his doorway. Tall and lean, with a Confederate cavalry hat pulled low over his eyes, he carried himself with the lazy confidence of a man used to being feared. 2 more men followed him in, spreading out in a way that made Cooper's old instincts stir to life. "Heard this. It was the best saloon in Tucson," the tall man drawled, running a finger along the polished bar top. "Mighty clean for a place so far from civilization." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Name's McKinnon. James McKinnon. Perhaps you've heard of me?" Cooper continued wiping a glass, his movements unhurried. "Can't say that I have, Mr. McKinnon. What can I get you, gentlemen?" The answer earned a laugh from McKinnon's companions, but there was an edge to it that spoke of violence barely contained. James McKinnon's smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He wasn't used to being unrecognized, especially not by a mere saloonkeeper. Little did he know, he'd just taken the first step toward awakening a legend that had been sleeping for 15 years. The quiet man behind the bar was about to remind the West why some legends are best left undisturbed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. McKinnon's fingers drummed against the polished wood of the bar, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet saloon. The afternoon heat had driven most customers away, leaving only old Tom Baker dozing in the corner and a pair of cattle drivers playing a half-hearted game of cards near the window. 3 whiskeys, McKinnon said finally, his voice carrying that peculiar tone of a man unused to being ignored. Your best. Behind him, his companions shifted their positions slightly, hands hovering near their holsters with practiced casualness. They'd done this dance before in other saloons, other towns. Cooper reached for the bottle of Fitzgerald bourbon he kept on the upper shelf, his movements measured and deliberate. As he poured, his wire-rimmed spectacles caught the light from the window, momentarily obscuring his eyes. That'll be 30 cents, Mr. McKinnon. The outlaw's hand slid into his vest, but instead of money, he produced a worn newspaper clipping. Smoothing it against the bar top, he revealed a crude sketch of himself alongside a reward notice for $5,000. How about now? He asked softly. Name ring any bells? Cooper studied the paper with mild interest, as if examining the day's dinner menu. Afraid I'm not much for current events, Mr. McKinnon, though I do appreciate you showing me. Helps explain why you're carrying so many weapons into my establishment. The younger McKinnon brother, Robert, stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. James, this sodbuster's making fun of us. Let me teach him some patience, little brother. James raised a hand, his eyes never leaving Cooper's face. There was something about the saloonkeeper's calm that nagged at him, like an itch he couldn't quite scratch. Tell me, Mr. Cooper. Michael Cooper. Tell me, Mr. Cooper, how does a man in your position stay so unconcerned when faced with men of our reputation? Most folks, they hear the McKinnon name, they get a certain shake in their hands, a quiver in their voice. But you... He leaned forward, studying Cooper's face. You act like you're serving drinks to Sunday churchgoers. Cooper began polishing another glass, his movements precise and unhurried. In my experience, Mr. McKinnon, reputations are like shadows. They often appear larger than the men casting them. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. The 2 cattle drivers quietly gathered their cards and slipped out, while old Tom Baker's snoring took on a slightly forced quality. Robert McKinnon's hand had drifted to his gun, his trigger finger twitching with barely contained violence. James McKinnon's smile remained fixed, but his eyes had gone cold. Interesting philosophy, Mr. Cooper. Let me share one of my own. He reached for the whiskey, but instead of drinking, he slowly poured it across the bar's polished surface. Reputations they're earned, and I earned mine by teaching lessons to men who didn't show proper respect. Cooper watched the amber liquid spread across his carefully maintained bar top, saying nothing. His silence seemed to infuriate the outlaws even more than any protest might have. The third member of their group, a scarred man they called Hawkins, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the floor. Maybe, James McKinnon continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, it's time we gave the good people of Tucson a demonstration. Show them why the McKinnon name carries weight. His hand moved toward his gun with deliberate slowness. Unless, of course, you'd like to apologize for your philosophical observations. Behind his wire-rimmed glasses, Cooper's pale blue eyes remained steady, betraying nothing of the calculations running through his mind. 15 years of peace hung in the balance, weighing against the memory of skills he'd hoped never to use again. But as his hand moved beneath the bar, finding the familiar grip of his hidden Colt, he knew some choices had already been made for him. Sheriff Thomas Wade was enjoying a quiet afternoon in his office when Deputy Frank Wilson burst through the door, his young face flushed with excitement. Sheriff, the McKinnon gang's at the Silver Dollar, all 3 of them. Wade set down his coffee cup slowly, his weathered face betraying no emotion. Cooper's place? A slight frown creased his forehead. He'd hoped this day would never come, had prayed that Michael Cooper's past would stay buried in the Kansas dust. Should we gather some men? Wilson asked, already reaching for his rifle. Maybe send someone for the cavalry patrol camped outside town? No. Wade stood up, buckling on his gun belt with deliberate care. "We're going to walk over there, nice and quiet. And Frank, ... He fixed the young deputy with a steady gaze. "Whatever happens, remember that things aren't always what they seem." Back at the Silver Dollar, the tension had drawn as tight as a hangman's rope. James McKinnon's hand hovered near his gun, his eyes locked on Cooper's seemingly impassive face. Robert McKinnon and Hawkins had spread out, creating a triangle of death around the bar. "Last chance, barkeep," James drawled, his voice carrying that peculiar softness that often preceded violence. "A simple apology might save your life, might even save your precious saloon." Cooper's hand remained beneath the bar, fingers wrapped around the familiar grip of his hidden Colt. Memories he'd long suppressed flickered through his mind. The speed contests in Kansas City, the notorious gunfight at Harper's Crossing where he'd taken down 3 men before they could clear leather. He'd walked away from that life, sworn never to draw on another man again. "Mr. McKinnon," he said quietly, "I've spent 15 years building this place. 15 years serving drinks, breaking up fights, and making sure every customer, whether ranch hand or railroad baron, gets treated with the same respect." He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses with his free hand. "I'd hate to mess up my floor with bloodstains." The words hung in the air for a moment before Robert McKinnon burst out laughing. "Listen to this fool, James. Threatening us? Why, I bet he's never even fired a gun in his life." Old Tom Baker, still pretending to sleep in the corner, cracked one eye open. He'd been around long enough to recognize the calm before the storm, and something in Cooper's voice had triggered ancient instincts. "You know what I think?" James McKinnon leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I think you're all talk, Mr. Cooper. A man who's handled guns, who's been in real fights, he carries himself different, moves different." His smile turned cruel. "But you're just a simple barkeep playing at being brave." Cooper sighed softly, the sound barely audible above the whisper of wind through the batwing doors. "There's an old saying in Kansas," he said, his pale blue eyes meeting McKinnon's gaze. "The quietest hands deal the deadliest cards." Something in his tone, or perhaps something in those steady eyes behind the wire-rimmed glasses, finally triggered a warning in James McKinnon's mind. For the first time, he noticed how still Cooper stood, how his movements, even while appearing casual, held a fluid economy that seemed oddly familiar. Sheriff Wade and Deputy Wilson were halfway across the street when they heard Robert McKinnon's voice rise in anger. "Enough talk, James. Let's show this fool what happens when—" The rest of his words were cut off by the sound of breaking glass as someone inside the saloon knocked over a bottle. Wade quickened his pace slightly, his right hand dropping instinctively to his gun. He knew what was coming, had seen it before long ago in a Kansas town much like this one. The broken bottle shattered the afternoon quiet, shards of glass skittering across the wooden floor like ice on a frozen pond. Hawkins had knocked it over while adjusting his stance, his scarred face twisting in annoyance at his own clumsiness. That simple accident changed everything. In the split second of distraction, James McKinnon saw something that made his blood run cold. As Cooper's eyes flicked toward the sound, his wire-rimmed glasses caught the light. And in that brief moment, McKinnon recognized the look. It was the same predatory awareness he'd seen in the eyes of the deadliest gunman he'd ever faced. "Wait," McKinnon said, raising his hand to stop his brother's impending move. "Robert, hold on." There was something in his voice that made even the hot-headed younger McKinnon pause. "Mr. Cooper, what did you say your full name was?" Cooper's hand remained hidden beneath the bar, his stance seemingly relaxed, yet perfectly balanced. "I didn't," he replied softly, "though once in Kansas some folks called me Lightning." The effect of those words was immediate. Hawkins took an involuntary step backward, his boot crunching on broken glass. Robert McKinnon's face went pale, his hand frozen halfway to his holster. Even James McKinnon, notorious for his iron nerve, felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine. "Lightning Cooper?" Robert whispered, his voice cracking. "The Kansas Lightning? But you're dead." Everyone says you died in that shootout at Harper's Crossing. Old Tom Baker, still feigning sleep in the corner, allowed himself a small smile. He'd suspected Cooper's true identity for months, watching the way the saloonkeeper handled rowdy customers with that peculiar mix of patience and absolute authority. Harper's Crossing, Cooper mused, as if remembering a distant dream. 4 men died that day, but I was now one of them. His pale blue eyes fixed on James McKinnon. The papers got it wrong. Wouldn't be the first time. Outside, Sheriff Wade and Deputy Wilson had reached the saloon's entrance. Wade held up his hand, stopping Wilson from barging in. He could feel the tension radiating through the bat-wing doors, thick as summer lightning before a storm. "But you're a saloonkeeper," Hawkins protested, his voice unnaturally high. "Been here for years, serving drinks, cleaning glasses." "Man's gotta have a hobby," Cooper replied mildly, "especially when he's retiring from his previous line of work." His glasses glinted in the afternoon sun. Though some skill, well, they never really go away. James McKinnon's mind raced, calculating odds, remembering stories. Lightning Cooper was more than just a gunfighter. He was a legend, a man who'd reportedly once drawn and fired 5 shots before a dropped coin could hit the ground, if even half the stories were true. "Seems we've had a misunderstanding," McKinnon said carefully, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning dew. "Perhaps we should take our business elsewhere." "Perhaps you should." Cooper's voice remained gentle, but there was steel beneath the softness. "Though first, I believe you owe me 30 cents for the whiskey, and another $1 for the bottle your friend broke." The coins appeared on the bar with remarkable speed. James McKinnon backed toward the door, keeping his hands well away from his guns, his brother and Hawkins following suit. None of them dared turn their backs on the quiet man behind the bar. Sheriff Wade stepped aside as the 3 outlaws emerged into the harsh afternoon sunlight. He noted their shaken expressions, the way their hands trembled slightly as they mounted their horses. Only when the thunder of hoofbeats had faded into the distance did he enter the saloon, finding Cooper calmly sweeping up the broken glass. Sheriff Wade watched Cooper methodically sweep the broken glass into a neat pile, the same careful precision he used for everything else. Deputy Wilson stood in the doorway, his young face a mixture of awe and confusion, trying to reconcile the humble saloonkeeper with the legendary gunman he'd just learned about. "They'll be back," Wade said finally, breaking the silence. "McKinnon's not the type to let his pride heal without a reckoning." Cooper nodded, emptying the dustpan into a wastebin. "I know. Men like that, they're like rattlers. Once they feel cornered, they don't forget." He straightened his spectacles, a habit that now seemed less nervous tic and more calculated gesture. "How long have you known Thomas?" "Since the day you rode in," Wade replied, settling onto a bar stool. "Recognized you from a poster I saw in Kansas City, back in '62. Though you didn't wear glasses then." Old Tom Baker finally gave up his pretense of sleep, stretching as he rose from his corner chair. "Whole thing makes sense now," he chuckled. "Way you handled those Martinez brothers last month, turning their own momentum against them. Never seen a man move so fast with just a serving tray." Cooper allowed himself a small smile. "Sometimes the best fight is the one you win without drawing a gun." He began wiping down the bar where McKinnon had spilled the whiskey. 15 years I've tried to leave that life behind. 15 years of building something different." "Why Tucson?" Wilson blurted out, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. "I mean, if you're really Lightning Cooper, you could have gone anywhere. Why run a saloon in a dusty corner of the territory?" "Frank," Wade started to admonish, but Cooper raised a hand. "It's a fair question." He paused in his cleaning, looking out the window at the sun-baked street. "After Harper's Crossing, I realized something. Every town I rode into, people either wanted to kill me or hire me to kill someone else. No in between. But a saloonkeeper—" He gestured around at his establishment. "People tell him their troubles, share their joys. He's part of something living, not just dealing in death." Wade nodded slowly, And now, Cooper sighed, removing his glasses to polish them. Now I've got until sundown to prepare. McKinnon's pride won't let him leave town without trying something. He'll spend the afternoon gathering men, planning, probably hit after dark. I'll post deputies around the block, Wade offered, but Cooper shook his head. No need to risk your men, Thomas. This is my problem. Like hell it is, old Tom growled, surprising them all with his vehemence. This ain't Kansas, and you ain't alone no more. Every rancher, miner, and cowpoke who's ever sat at this bar owes you for fair deals and friendly words. We take care of our own in Tucson. Deputy Wilson straightened his shoulders. He's right, Mr. Cooper. Half the men in town would stand with you if they knew. And that's exactly why they can't know, Cooper interrupted firmly. The moment this becomes about Lightning Cooper, gunfighter, instead of Michael Cooper, saloonkeeper, innocent people could get hurt. McKinnon's type, they don't care about bystanders. Wade studied his old friend's face, seeing beneath the calm exterior to the steel beneath. At least let me help you prepare. I remember what happened in Dodge City when they cornered you in that stable. 3 men died, but it could have been worse if you hadn't planned it out. Cooper replaced his glasses, and for a moment, Wade caught a glimpse of the legendary gunman beneath the saloonkeeper's peaceful demeanor. Yes, he said softly. We'll need to plan. Because James McKinnon isn't just coming back for revenge. Men like him, when they're scared, they become dangerous. He'll want to make sure every gunman from here to Texas knows what happens to legends who try to retire. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Tucson's main street as James McKinnon and his men rode into the Mexican Quarter. They stopped outside a weathered adobe building with a faded sign reading Cantina del Sol. Inside, they found exactly who they were looking for. Santiago Velez, a notorious gun-for-hire who'd made his reputation in the border wars. Heard you're looking for men, Santiago said without looking up from his cards. Must be important to bring you to this part of town. McKinnon pulled up a chair, his face tight with controlled anger. Ever hear of Lightning Cooper? Santiago's cards stopped moving. See, everyone in the business has. Dead now, they say. Harper's Crossing many years ago. Not dead. McKinnon's voice was barely above a whisper. Running a saloon right here in Tucson. The Silver Dollar. Now Santiago did look up, his dark eyes sharp with interest. Michael Cooper? The quiet one with the glasses? A slow smile spread across his weathered face. Interesting. Very interesting. But why come to me? Because I need men. Good ones. And I need them quiet. McKinnon leaned forward. Cooper's got friends in town. Sheriff Wade. Others. This needs to be handled. Professionally. Meanwhile, back at the Silver Dollar, Cooper was making his own preparations. He'd sent most of his staff home early, keeping only old Tom Baker to help him rearrange the furniture. Each table, each chair, was positioned with deliberate purpose, creating clear lanes of fire while eliminating potential cover. Just like Mission Creek, Wade observed, watching Cooper work. You always did have a way of turning a room into a trap. Cooper paused, a chair held halfway to its new position. Mission Creek was different. I was younger then, faster. And now you're smarter, Wade countered. Experience counts for more than speed sometimes. Deputy Wilson returned from his reconnaissance around town, his young face grave. McKinnon's gathering men. Saw him meeting with Santiago Velez and his crew. Word is he's offering $500 a gun. Santiago Velez? Old Tom whistled low. Heard he killed 3 Rangers in a fair fight down in El Paso last year. Cooper continued his methodical preparation, checking sightlines from different angles. Wasn't a fair fight, he said, quietly. Velez never fights fair. He had men on the roof with rifles. The Rangers never saw them. The revelation hung in the air as Cooper moved behind the bar, removing panels to reveal hidden compartments. From these, he withdrew extra ammunition, a second Colt revolver, and a Winchester rifle that looked well-maintained despite its age. "That's a model 1866, Wilson observed with professional interest. "Yellow boy, don't see many of those anymore." Cooper checked the rifle's action with practiced ease. "Gift from a friend in Kansas. Good for reaching out to folks who think distance keeps them safe." The sun was sinking toward the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of blood red and gold. Cooper stood at his window, watching the lengthening shadows. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the dying light, making his eyes unreadable. "They'll wait for full dark," he said softly. "Velez likes to work at night. Says it levels the field between good shots and lucky ones." He turned to Wade. "You should go, Thomas. All of you. What's coming? It's not your fight." Wade shook his head firmly. "Already told you, Michael. This is our town, too. Besides," he smiled grimly, "someone needs to make sure there are witnesses to tell the true story of what happens here tonight. Too many legends end up twisted in the telling." Cooper studied his old friend's face for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "At least get word to the other businesses on the street. Anyone living above their shops should find other arrangements for the night. When Santiago Velez is involved, walls aren't always thick enough to stop stray bullets." Night fell over Tucson like a heavy blanket, bringing with it an unusual quiet. The normal evening bustle of saloons and gambling halls had been replaced by shuttered windows and empty streets. Word had spread quickly, not about Lightning Cooper's true identity, but about the coming storm. Townspeople knew trouble when they saw it brewing. In the gathering darkness, Santiago Velez positioned his men with the precision of a chess master. 2 crack shots with Spencer rifles took up positions on the roof of the mercantile across the street. 3 more men filtered into the alley behind the Silver Dollar, while Velez himself led another group to the abandoned carpenter's shop next door. "Remember," he whispered to his men, "McKinnon wants him alive if possible, dead if necessary, but either way, he wants it done clean." Inside the Silver Dollar, Cooper moved through his familiar domain with practiced ease, even in the dim light. He'd left a single lamp burning behind the bar, positioned to cast more shadows than illumination. Every few minutes, he or one of the others would pass in front of it, maintaining the illusion of normal activity. 12 men, by my count," Deputy Wilson reported from his observation post near the back window. "No, 13. Another one just slipped into Peterson's corral." Wade checked his ammunition for the 3rd time. "Santiago's being thorough. Using the corral means he's cutting off the escape route to the livery stable." "There is no escape route," Cooper said quietly, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "That's what they haven't figured out yet. This isn't about getting away. It's about ending it." Old Tom Baker, who'd refused to leave despite Cooper's insistence, grimaced. 13 against 4. Ain't exactly sporting odds." 15, Cooper corrected, his keen eyes picking out movements in the darkness. "McKinnon and his brother are watching from the hotel balcony, close enough to claim credit, far enough to stay clear of the worst fighting." He paused, head tilted slightly. "And Hawkins. He's probably circling around to cover the root cellar entrance." Wade shook his head in amazement. Even after 15 years, Cooper's situational awareness was extraordinary. Every sound, every shadow registered and analyzed. It was like watching a wolf scent the wind before a hunt. "You never did tell me what really happened at Harper's Crossing," Wade said, more to pass the time than expecting an answer. To his surprise, Cooper responded, 4 men came to kill me. Professional shootouts hired by a cattle baron I'd crossed paths with." Cooper's voice was soft, reflective. "They thought they had me cornered in the livery stable. Didn't realize I'd spent 2 days preparing the ground, learning every creak in the floorboards, every shadow where moonlight wouldn't reach." Wilson leaned forward, entranced despite the tension. "What happened?" "Same thing that's about to happen here." Cooper's pale eyes gleamed behind his glasses. "They thought numbers and reputation would win the day. Forgot that a man fighting on ground he knows, fighting for something more than money. He let the thought trail off as a flicker of movement caught his attention. Santiago's moving his men into position, Wade observed, noting the subtle shifts in the shadows outside. Won't be long now. Cooper nodded, reaching beneath his bar one last time. From a hidden compartment, he withdrew something that made Wade's eyes widen, a gun belt old but well-maintained, with elaborate silver conchos that caught what little light there was. Didn't think you kept that, Wade whispered. Some things you can't leave behind, Cooper replied, buckling on the belt with practiced ease. No matter how far you run. The familiar weight of the gun belt seemed to change him subtly, as if awakening something that had been sleeping for 15 years. A soft whistle pierced the night, Santiago's signal to his men. The time for waiting was over. The first shot didn't come from Santiago's men, but from Hawkins, who'd grown impatient watching the root cellar door. The bullet splintered wood near the back entrance, a ranging shot meant to draw attention or provoke movement. Inside the Silver Dollar, nobody flinched. Hawkins always was excitable, Cooper remarked quietly, as if commenting on the weather. In about 10 seconds, Santiago will have his roof men open fire. Standard pattern? Try to pin us down while his ground team moves in. Right on cue, the Spencer rifles across the street began their deadly song. Bullets punched through windows and thudded into walls, sending splinters flying. But Cooper and his allies were already moving, shifting to positions carefully planned hours before. Tom, remember what I told you about the bar? Cooper's voice carried clearly despite the chaos. Old Tom Baker nodded, dropping behind the reinforced wooden structure. Cooper had spent years gradually adding steel plates inside the bar's framework, creating a fortress that looked like ordinary furniture. Deputy Wilson, young but quick, manned the Winchester rifle from a protected alcove, ready to discourage anyone trying to rush the front entrance. Sheriff Wade positioned himself to cover the side windows, his experienced eyes scanning for muzzle flashes in the darkness. "They're moving," Wade called out, spotting shadows detaching themselves from the deeper darkness of the alley. Santiago was executing a classic pincer movement, trying to pressure multiple points simultaneously. Cooper's voice remained steady, almost contemplative. "Santiago's good, I'll give him that. 3-point attack, well coordinated, but he's making the same mistake they made at Harper's Crossing." He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "He thinks he's hunting me." The first of Santiago's men reached the front porch, keeping low to avoid their own sniper's line of fire. The floorboards creaked, exactly where Cooper had loosened them earlier. The sound gave Deputy Wilson the target he needed. His Winchester barked twice, and 2 shadows disappeared from the porch, their curses indicating wounds rather than fatalities. "Your boy's got potential, Thomas," Cooper commented to Wade. "Good instincts." Before Wade could respond, the back door exploded inward. 2 of Santiago's men rushed in, guns blazing. But Cooper had prepared for this too. The overturned tables they thought would provide cover had been carefully weighted on one side, making them roll unexpectedly when struck. The attackers found themselves suddenly exposed. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion for those watching. Cooper's hand moved with liquid grace, his Colt clearing leather with a speed that seemed to deny physics. 2 shots, fired so close together they sounded like a single report. Both attackers went down, clutching shoulders rendered useless by carefully placed bullets. "Still don't kill unless you have to?" Wade asked, covering the fallen men. "A dead man can't learn from his mistakes," Cooper replied, already shifting his attention to new threats. More shadows were gathering outside, Santiago adjusting his strategy after the first failure. Up on the hotel balcony, James McKinnon watched through his spyglass, his face darkening with each passing minute. "Something's wrong," he muttered to his brother. "Cooper's moving like he knows where every attack is coming from." Robert McKinnon spat over the railing. "That's impossible. Even if he is lightning Cooper, he can't predict." "He's not predicting," James interrupted, a cold realization dawning. "He's choreographing every move, every position." His hands tightened on the spyglass. He's been planning this since we walked into his saloon this afternoon? Maybe even before that. Below, Santiago Velez was coming to the same conclusion. His carefully orchestrated assault was being picked apart by a defender who seemed to anticipate every move, every tactic. The precise shots taking down his men weren't lucky. They were calculated, placed exactly where and when Cooper wanted them. Santiago Velez had built his reputation on adaptability, but now he found himself second-guessing every move. 3 more of his men had been wounded in the last 5 minutes, each shot placed with surgical precision to disable rather than kill. The Silver Dollar had become a trap, and he was watching his carefully laid plans unravel. "We need to smoke them out," he muttered to his remaining men. "Martinez, get the coal oil. We'll burn." A single shot rang out, and the coal oil can Martinez was reaching for exploded, spraying its contents harmlessly into the dirt. The shot had come from an impossible angle, somehow threading between 2 buildings to find its target. "He's been watching us all day," Santiago realized aloud, noting where we stored our supplies, marking every position. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. The stories about him. They weren't exaggerated. Inside the saloon, Cooper was explaining to Wilson how he'd known about the coal oil. Saw them stash it this afternoon when they thought no one was watching. Men like Santiago, they always have a scorched earth policy as backup. But that shot. Wilson shook his head in amazement. "I couldn't even see the target from here." "Geometry," Cooper replied simply. "Every angle in this town, every reflection in every window, I've had 15 years to learn them all." He shifted position smoothly as more bullets thudded into the bar. Course, having the sun in their eyes all afternoon while they were setting up helped. Makes men careless about being seen. Wade, reloading his revolver, couldn't help but smile. "You really never stopped preparing, did you? All these years serving drinks, you were actually learning the battlefield," Cooper confirmed. "A man's got to have a hobby." A new sound cut through the gunfire, breaking glass from above. One of Santiago's men had managed to reach the 2nd floor of the neighboring building, but before he could take advantage of the elevated position, old Tom Baker's shotgun roared, forcing the attacker to retreat. "Good timing, Tom," Cooper called out. "He'll try the other window next, the one behind the green curtain." Sure enough, seconds later, movement flickered behind the indicated window. This time, Cooper's shot drove the man back, splintering the window frame inches from his head. Up on the hotel balcony, James McKinnon's frustration was reaching its peak. "Santiago's losing control," he growled. "We need to—" "James!" Robert's urgent whisper interrupted him. "Look at the street!" The main street of Tucson, previously deserted, was beginning to fill with shadows. Quietly, carefully, men were emerging from doorways and alleys, ranchers, shopkeepers, miners, all armed, all moving with purpose. "Looks like Cooper's made some friends these past 15 years, Robert observed nervously. Inside the Silver Dollar, Wade noticed the reinforcements too. "Told you the town wouldn't stand idle," he said to Cooper. "Those are all men you've helped, treated fair. They're not about to let Santiago burn you out." Cooper nodded slightly, but his attention was focused elsewhere. "Santiago's noticed, too. He's pulling his men back, tightening his circle. But he's got one more card to play." He turned to Wade. "Get ready. He'll try to rush us all at once, use the confusion to get inside. It's what I would do in his position." As if on cue, Santiago's whistle cut through the night. A different signal this time, more urgent. His remaining men began laying down covering fire, their shots becoming more rapid, less aimed. "Here they come," Cooper said softly, moving to the center of the room. He removed his wire-rimmed glasses, carefully folding them and placing them in his shirt pocket. For the first time that night, his eyes were fully visible, and Wade saw in them not the quiet saloonkeeper, but the legend he'd once been. "Remember," Cooper added, his voice carrying clearly to all his allies, "when they come through those doors, shoot to wound. Every man who walks away tonight becomes part of the story. And sometimes the story is more important than the fight. Santiago Velez's final gambit began with a thunder of boots and a hail of gunfire. His remaining men charged from multiple directions, their shots keeping defenders' heads down while they closed the distance. But even in this chaos, Cooper's preparations proved decisive. The first wave hit tripwires Cooper had strung across the doorways, not to trap, but to break stride and disrupt timing. The second wave stumbled over their fallen companions, perfect targets for Wilson's Winchester. The third wave made it inside, only to find themselves channeled by overturned tables into pre-sighted lanes of fire. Like a cattle chute, old Tom Baker observed from his position, his shotgun barking at precise intervals. Steering them right where you want them. Cooper moved like flowing water, each shot deliberate and precise. 2 men went down clutching their gun hands, another spun away with a wounded shoulder. He never seemed to hurry, yet somehow managed to be exactly where he needed to be moment after moment. "It's not possible," one of Santiago's men shouted, panic evident in his voice. "Nobody's this fast." "Not about speed," Cooper replied calmly, his next shot destroying a man's gun without breaking the skin of his hand. "About knowing where you'll be before you do." Outside, the gathering townspeople had formed a loose cordon, cutting off any retreat. Samuel Chen, the local blacksmith who'd never forgotten how Cooper had helped him keep his shop during hard times, led a group that systematically collected wounded men and disarmed them. James McKinnon, watching from his balcony perch, felt the situation slipping away. "This isn't just about Cooper anymore," he told his brother. "The whole damn town's turned against us." "Because they don't know who he really is," Robert insisted. "If they knew about Kansas—" "They know exactly who he is," James interrupted. "He's the man who gave them fair deals, who listened to their troubles, who made them feel welcome in his place. Lightning Cooper or Michael Cooper, to them, it doesn't matter anymore." Santiago himself finally entered the fray, moving with the skill that had made him famous along the border. He rolled through a broken window, came up firing with both hands. His shots were perfect, would have killed any normal man. But Cooper wasn't where Santiago expected him to be. "Looking for me?" The quiet voice came from behind him. Santiago spun, trigger fingers tightening, but his guns seemed to leap from his hands, knocked away by shots so perfectly placed they left his fingers intact but stinging. "Impossible," Santiago breathed, staring at his empty hands. "I had you dead to rights." "No." Cooper's voice held almost gentle correction. "You had where you thought I'd be. 15 years, Santiago. 15 years I've practiced every move, every position in this room. I could walk it blindfolded." Wade, securing the last of the resistance, called out, "That's all of them, Michael." Except a final shot rang out. Hawkins, who'd worked his way to the roof, taking a desperate chance. The bullet passed through the space where Cooper had been standing a split second before. Cooper's return shot echoed before Hawkins's bullet had finished its journey, catching the shooter high in the shoulder and sending him sprawling onto the roof's edge. "Still alive?" Wade asked as they heard Hawkins's cursing. "Always," Cooper replied, his voice carrying that same steady calm. "Dead men don't learn. Dead men can't spread the story." He turned to Santiago, who remained frozen in place. "That's what none of you understood. Tonight was never about the fight. It was about the legend." Santiago's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "You wanted this, wanted witnesses, wanted everyone to know that some places are safe," Cooper finished, "that some lines can't be crossed, because the next time someone thinks about bringing trouble to Tucson, they won't just worry about facing Lightning Cooper. They'll remember how a whole town stood together." Dawn crept over Tucson, painting the aftermath in shades of gold and crimson. Dr. Matthews had his hands full, treating 17 wounded men in his clinic, each one bearing Cooper's signature. Precise wounds that would heal clean, designed to teach rather than kill. Not a single fatality marked the night's violence, though pride and reputation had suffered deadly blows. James McKinnon watched from his hotel window as his carefully gathered force was systematically disarmed and escorted to the jail. His face bore the tight expression of a man watching years of carefully built fear and intimidation crumble to dust. "We could still make a run for it," Robert suggested, but his heart wasn't in it. They both knew their window of opportunity had closed with the rising sun. "No point," James replied, his voice heavy with resignation. "Man like Cooper, he's probably got riders watching every trail out of town. Probably had them in place before we even woke up yesterday." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Been one step behind him since we walked into that saloon." Down in the street, Santiago Velez sat on a wooden bench outside the doctor's office, waiting his turn to have powder burns treated. His dark eyes followed Cooper as the saloonkeeper moved through the aftermath, helping to clear debris and check on wounded men, even those who'd tried to kill him hours before. "I don't understand," Santiago said as Cooper passed near. "You could have killed us all. Your reputation would have grown even larger." Cooper paused in his work, studying the gunman thoughtfully. "Reputation's like a pistol, Santiago. Best when it stays holstered but ready." He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, which had reappeared with the morning light. "Dead men tell no tales but living ones. They'll tell this story in every saloon from here to Mexico." Old Tom Baker, helping to sweep up broken glass, nodded in agreement. "And every telling will make it bigger. The night Lightning Cooper faced down 20 men without taking a life." He grinned. "Though I reckon it'll be 40 men by the time it reaches Texas." Sheriff Wade, who'd been coordinating with his deputies to process the prisoners, approached with news. "Riders coming in from the north. Looks like the marshal's office finally got your telegram about the McKinnon gang. Bit late," Wilson observed, but Cooper shook his head. "Right on time," he corrected. "They'll handle the formal arrests, take statements, make everything official. Better for the story that way. Law and order. Triumphing over chaos. Not just one man's stand." Wade studied his old friend with newfound appreciation. "You really did think of everything, didn't you? Even the timing of that telegram. You knew exactly how long it would take them to respond." Cooper's slight smile spoke volumes. "A man learns to plan ahead in my line of work." He paused, considering. "Former line of work." Samuel Chen approached, still wearing his leather apron from the blacksmith shop. "Mr. Cooper, some of us been talking about what you did for the town. We want you to know—" "I know, Samuel," Cooper interrupted gently. "But right now, what this town needs isn't a legend. It needs its saloonkeeper back." He looked around at the damaged building. "And I've got a lot of cleaning to do before opening time." "Opening time?" Wilson exclaimed. "After all this?" "Best way to show that life goes on," Cooper explained, already moving chairs back into position. "Besides, I imagine quite a few people will want a drink while they talk about what happened here last night. Might as well make sure they get the story straight." As if to prove his point, the morning stage was already pulling into town, its passengers sure to be full of questions about the unusual number of armed men and wounded prisoners in the streets. The legend of Lightning Cooper was about to spread far beyond Tucson's borders, but in a way no one had expected, not as a tale of death and vengeance, but as a story of justice tempered with mercy. By midday, the Silver Dollar Saloon had been swept clean of broken glass and bullet holes were already being patched. Cooper worked alongside volunteers from the town, his movements carrying the same methodical precision, whether he was serving drinks or dispatching gunmen. The morning stage passengers had already spread the first versions of the story, each telling more elaborate than the last. Marshal Daniel Harrison, who'd arrived with the federal contingent, sat at the bar watching Cooper work. His weathered face bore the expression of a man trying to reconcile two very different images of the same person. "You know," Harrison said finally, "I was in Kansas City when you faced down the Thatcher brothers. 4 men dead in less than 10 seconds, never seen anything like it." He paused, studying Cooper's response. "Hard to believe that same man's been serving drinks and breaking up bar fights for 15 years. Cooper continued, wiping down the bar, his movements unhurried. Maybe that's why it worked, Marshal. Everyone looks for Lightning Cooper to come riding in with guns blazing. Nobody expects him to be the man who remembers their favorite whiskey or listens to their troubles. The Marshal nodded slowly. And now? Story like this will spread. Others might come, looking to make a name for themselves. Let them come, Old Tom interjected from his corner. They'll find more than just one man waiting for them now. He wasn't wrong. Already, the town had changed in subtle but significant ways. Shopkeepers who'd never spoken to each other were now discussing plans for mutual defense. Samuel Chen was offering to teach basic shooting skills to anyone willing to learn. The territory's most notorious town was transforming into a community. James McKinnon, watching from his jail cell as his men were loaded into prison wagons, finally understood the full scope of his mistake. "We didn't just lose to Cooper," he told his brother. "We lost to every man and woman in this town. And that story," he shook his head ruefully, "that story's going to follow us to prison." Santiago Velez, his wounds treated and his guns confiscated, approached Cooper before the Marshal's men could take him away. "In El Paso," he said quietly, "they called me the fastest gun on the border. But you were playing with us? Like a cat with mice." Cooper paused in his work, considering his response carefully. "Speed's not everything, Santiago. A man can be quick on the draw and still die if he doesn't understand the ground he's fighting on. Every floorboard, every shadow, every angle, they're all part of the dance. A dance you've been rehearsing for 15 years, Santiago realized aloud. Every day, serving drinks, watching the light move across the room, learning every detail. Life's funny that way," Cooper replied with a slight smile. "Sometimes the best way to prepare for a fight is to learn how to avoid one." Deputy Wilson, who'd been helping to catalog the confiscated weapons, approached with an unusual find. "Mr. Cooper found this in Hawkins's gear." He held out a yellowed wanted poster from Kansas, dated 1861. The sketch showed a younger Cooper without glasses, his face set in harder lines. "Keep it," Cooper said after a moment's consideration. "Might be worth something someday when people tell this story." Wade, overhearing, couldn't help but laugh. "Michael Cooper, turning down a chance to be famous. Now I've seen everything." "Fame's overrated," Cooper responded, returning to his work. "Peace and quiet, on the other hand." He gestured around at his saloon, at the town slowly returning to normal outside. "That's worth fighting for." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the Silver Dollar's windows, catching Cooper's wire-rimmed glasses as he moved behind his bar. To casual observers, he looked exactly like what he claimed to be, a simple saloonkeeper cleaning up after a rough night. But those who knew better could see something else, a man who'd found a different kind of strength, one built not on speed and violence, but on patience, preparation, and the quiet respect of a community. As evening approached, the Silver Dollar began filling with its regular customers, along with plenty of newcomers drawn by the fresh stories circulating through town. Cooper served them all with his usual quiet efficiency, though more than a few noticed how his movements seemed different now, more fluid, more purposeful, as if a veil had been lifted from a statue everyone had walked past but never truly seen. Marshal Harrison sat at a corner table with Sheriff Wade, watching the scene unfold. "Remarkable," he observed. "Most men after a night like that they'd be boasting playing the hero, but Cooper... Cooper's serving drinks and listening to other people tell the story," Wade finished, smiling. "And with each telling it grows a little larger, spreads a little further." Near the bar, a group of ranch hands who'd arrived on the afternoon stage were getting the tale from old Tom Baker, their eyes wide as he described the night's events. 17 men, Tom was saying, his voice carrying just far enough to make Cooper shake his head slightly. And not one of them killed, though every single shot found its mark exactly where he wanted it. 23. By my last count, one of the cattle drivers corrected. Heard it from a passenger who saw the wounded being treated this morning. Cooper continued his work, letting the stories flow around him like water around a rock. Each telling added new details, new embellishments, but the core truth remained. A quiet man had stood his ground, protected his home, and shown mercy to his enemies. Samuel Chen entered, still wearing his blacksmith's apron, carrying something wrapped in oiled cloth. "Mr. Cooper," he called out, making his way to the bar. "Found this while clearing debris from behind the saloon." He unwrapped the package, revealing one of Santiago's ornate revolvers, its silver inlay catching the lamplight. "Keep it," Cooper said without hesitation. "Hang it in your shop. Let it remind people that this town stands together now." The gesture wasn't lost on the crowd. Several men nodded approvingly, understanding that Cooper was deliberately spreading the ownership of the previous night's victory, making it belong to everyone rather than claiming it for himself. Deputy Wilson, who'd stopped by after his evening rounds, overheard a conversation between two merchants discussing plans to form a town council. "See what you started?" he said to Cooper. "Town's changing. Growing up, maybe." "Towns are like people," Cooper replied, his voice carrying that same quiet certainty that had faced down Santiago's men. "Give them a reason to stand tall. They rarely disappoint you." As night fell, Wade noticed riders approaching from the south. Texas Rangers, by the look of them, probably drawn by telegrams about the McKinnon gang's capture. "More law coming," he informed Cooper. "Stories already reaching further than we thought." Cooper nodded, unsurprised. "By week's end, it'll be in every newspaper from here to St. Louis. Not the story of Lightning Cooper's return, but of how a town stood up to men like McKinnon, how it chose justice over fear." "And the other story?" Wade asked softly. "The one about a legendary gunman who found a different way to fight?" "That one will spread too," Cooper acknowledged, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "But hopefully, it'll teach the right lesson. That sometimes the strongest stand a man can take is choosing not to kill when he has every right to." The saloon had grown crowded now, filled with voices sharing stories, making plans, building something new from the ashes of the previous night's violence. Cooper moved among them as he always had, quiet and unassuming, yet somehow different. The legend of Lightning Cooper hadn't just been reborn. It had been transformed into something deeper, something that spoke not just of speed and skill with a gun, but of patience, wisdom, and the strength found in community. A week after the night that changed Tucson, the Silver Dollar Saloon had settled back into its usual rhythm. The bullet holes were patched, the windows replaced, and if the bar seemed more crowded than before, well, that was just good for business. Cooper went about his work with the same quiet efficiency he'd always shown, though now customers noticed how their drinks seemed to appear precisely when needed, as if the saloonkeeper could anticipate their thirsts before they spoke. The McKinnon gang had been transferred to Territorial Prison, their legend diminished by tales of how they'd been outmaneuvered by a simple barkeeper. Santiago Velez, recovering from his wounds in the prison infirmary, had begun writing his memoirs, promising to tell the true story of the night he faced the ghost of Lightning Cooper. "Got another newspaper asking for interviews," Wade mentioned, settling onto his usual stool. "This one's from back east. Offering good money, they say." Cooper continued polishing a glass, his movements precise and unhurried. "Tell them what you saw, Thomas. Sometimes the best stories are the ones told by witnesses rather than heroes." "And what exactly did we witness?" The question came from Marshal Harrison, who'd lingered in town longer than strictly necessary. "Because I've heard 30 different versions in the past week, each one bigger than the last. They witnessed what they needed to see," Cooper replied softly. "A town standing together, a fight won without needless death, a reminder that legends don't have to be built on blood." Outside, the afternoon stage arrived right on schedule. Among its passengers was a young man wearing a gun tied low, his eyes scanning the street with barely contained eagerness. Old Tom Baker, watching from the saloon's window, sighed. "First one's here already, looking to make his name. Cooper nodded, unsurprised. There'll be others, always are when stories like this spread. He paused in his work, studying the young gunman through the window. Give him about an hour. Once he hears the full story from the locals, sees how the town stands together now, he'll probably decide to catch the evening stage out. And if he doesn't, Wilson asked, then he'll learn the same lesson McKinnon did, that some legends aren't about who's fastest, but about knowing what's worth fighting for and what's worth forgiving. The young gunman did indeed leave on the evening stage, his bravado diminished by the stories he'd heard in every shop and street corner. Stories, not just about Lightning Cooper's speed and accuracy, but about how a quiet man had spent 15 years building something stronger than fear. As night fell over Tucson, Cooper stood at his window, watching the town he'd helped transform. Samuel Chen's forge glowed as he worked late, teaching eager students the basics of shooting. The newly formed town council was meeting in the hotel, planning improvements that would have seemed impossible a week ago. Even the Texas Rangers, preparing to ride out the next morning, had commented on how different this town felt from others they'd visited. You know what the best part of this story is? Wade asked, joining his friend at the window. It's not over. Every person who walks through those doors becomes part of it now. Every tale they carry to another town spreads the real message. Cooper smiled slightly, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. That the strongest weapons aren't always guns? That patience and preparation can overcome mere speed? That mercy can be more powerful than violence? All of that, Wade agreed. But mostly that a man can change, can find a different kind of strength. That Lightning Cooper didn't disappear in Kansas. He evolved into something better. Cooper returned to his work, the familiar routine that had become its own kind of legend. His movements still carried that fluid grace that had amazed witnesses a week ago, but now it seemed natural, part of who he was rather than who he had been. The tale of the quiet man behind the bar would be told and retold across the territories, growing with each telling. But its heart would always remain here, in a simple saloon where a legend had chosen to serve rather than strike, to protect rather than destroy, and in doing so, had written a new kind of story for the West. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.